What's happening, Bills Mafia? Ryan Thomas here live once again on the Thomas Take Sports podcast. We are counting down the days to the 2021 NFL Draft. A ton of topics to discuss pertaining to your favorite team, pertaining to my favorite team, the Buffalo Bills, and what the draft strategies could potentially be for the Buffalo Bills. The microscope in one Buffalo is right on that 30th overall selection. We don't know what the Buffalo Bills are going to do with that pick. Are they going to stay at 30? Are they going to trade down? Are they going to move up the draft board? We're waiting patiently, anxiously waiting. 15 days away from the 2021 NFL Draft. Mock drafts are circulating. Predictions are being thrown around. But in this video, I want to dive into the positions of priority for the Buffalo Bills that could be potentially targeted in this draft. Or throughout the rest of the offseason, as well as what is the quote-unquote Bills Mafia saying in regards to the Bills and that 30th overall selection. So first and foremost, yes, we're bringing it back. We're bringing back the dry erase board. Now, I put on this dry erase board the priority positions of the Buffalo Bills. Priority positions: corner, defensive line, linebacker, running back, offensive line, wide receiver, and tight end. And as you see there, I got running back with a question mark and tight end with a question mark. Very unsure as to whether or not the Bills will look at a running back in this draft. It appears as if a lot of the insiders or experts believe that the Buffalo Bills will target a running back, whether it's Najee Harris or Travis Etienne. I'm here to tell you, okay, let's break this down. 30th overall, that's a long wait for one of those two guys to still be available. I honestly don't believe in my heart of hearts that Travis Etienne or Najee Harris will be available for the Buffalo Bills at 30th overall. I think potentially Miami could look at taking a running back. Pittsburgh could take a look at a running back now that James Conner has moved on to the Arizona Cardinals. And there are other teams that could just say to themselves, hey, let's take a running back because we don't have one. We don't have a young one. We could use a running back that doesn't have much tread on the tires, so to speak. And, Travis Etienne and Najee Harris are two young running backs. So that, to me, I'm ruling that out for those reasons, and I'm also ruling that out due to the fact that I personally like Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. It's no secret. I think that both of those guys are more than adequate enough running backs to share the rock. You add in the fact that the Buffalo Bills brought in Matt Breida, I think that's a pretty decent three-headed monster there in the backfield for the Buffalo Bills. Moss, more of like the Rex Burkhead. Devin Singletary, more of like the Sony Michel. And then you have Matt Breida, more of like the James White, so to speak. So, and I only provide that comparison because Brian Daboll was obviously linked closely with the Patriots for quite some time. Is he trying to recreate that run game here in Buffalo? Will we see more of a run game from the Buffalo Bills in 2021 than we did in 2020? I got to tell you, it can't get much worse in terms of the run game. The run game, they were a one-dimensional offense, albeit a very successful offense last season, one of the best passing offenses in the league, but the run game was just so non-existent. And I think a lot of people are pointing the finger at the running backs themselves, where it's not that easy. It's a little bit of the running backs. Sure, you could throw that take out there. That's fine. But I think a little bit of it as well is the lack of run blocking from this Bills offensive line. And that's why I have offensive line written down here as a potential priority position. So priority positions, what that means to me is going into this draft, the Bills have very few quote unquote needs. There isn't a need for one position over the other. They have like a collective group of positions that they could address, that they could target and use this draft to their advantage. It's almost as if Brandon Beane has implemented the strategy of, we're going to use free agency to fill some holes so that we can go into the draft and say to ourselves, let's just take what we feel is the best fit for this team. Not necessarily the best player available, because I think a lot of these scouts and a lot of these GMs have their own opinion on who that is, where they could have a room of 10 scouts, GM, assistant GM, and Dan Morgan and Brandon Beane could say, hey, we don't really agree with this portion of it, but they're going to come to a collective decision and make the decision on who they pick. But ultimately, that call is Brandon Beane's call, no matter what, whether he agrees or disagrees with the scouts or any, front office member. So I think that priority positions is something that the fact that we can't really go into this draft, and it's uncharted territory is what I'm trying to say. It's uncharted territory in the sense that we're going into this draft without an blatantly obvious need, in my opinion. Now, to me, I think compared to what is the Bills Mafia saying, Bills Mafia seems as if they want a running back. Bills Mafia seems as if they want a defensive lineman. I don't think you could go wrong taking Najee Harris at 30 or Travis Etienne at 30. I just don't think they will be there. And I don't necessarily feel like that's the biggest priority position heading into this draft. I feel like, to me, adding a corner to pair alongside Trey White, whether it's Asante Samuel Jr. or not, one of those guys, one of those top 5 guys listed as a corner that could potentially be there at 30, or maybe they pick a player at 30 and they really like somebody at the beginning of the second round and they decide to move up into the beginning of the second round to take that said player. That would be a route that I think could potentially be traveled down if you're Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. You look at who you have to beat, who you have to get over, and you look at Cleveland, you look at Kansas City, you look at Baltimore. Is Baltimore the best passing offense? No, but this is a passing league. And to go from Trey White to Dane Jackson to Levi Wallace, I think the glass is half full with both Dane Jackson and Levi Wallace. I don't think we've seen the best from either one of those two guys. But I think both of those guys offer a ton of upside, and we have yet to see their best. And to say we've yet to see their best, I'm actually complimenting those guys when I say that, because I think Levi Wallace was a guy that showed hot or cold tendencies when he was quote unquote picked on by the opposing offense. You got Trey White on the other side, you got Levi Wallace on the other side. Who do you pick apart? Who do you try to attack? You're not going to try to attack Trey White. You're going to try to attack Levi Wallace. And I think that's why we saw some of the struggles from Levi. He was targeted often, far more often than Trey White, obviously. So if you could kind of remedy that situation, move Levi Wallace down the depth chart as a nickel corner along with Dane Jackson, let those guys play somewhat a shared role there, and then slot in a surefire thing at corner, and Asante Samuel Jr., who the Bills have visited with on multiple occasions. I would highly approve of that pick. I really like Asante Samuel Jr. Among a few of the other corners in this draft. That's a position that I listed as my top priority position. So along the way as well, defensive linemen. You have a select few defensive linemen in this draft in terms of edge rushers that previous years, last year, Yetur Gross-Matos was a guy that I really liked. And AJ Epinesa was a guy that Buffalo was able to pick in the second round. And a lot of people are saying, well, Ryan, they went after a defensive lineman last year in the second round. Are they going to reinvest in a defensive lineman this time around? And yeah, I think they should. Just because they drafted a defensive lineman last year doesn't mean they shouldn't this year. And that's mainly due to the fact that you have Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison at the age of 33 and 32, I believe, 34 and 32. My memory serves me right. That's long in the tooth, to say the least. Addison's really only on a 1-year deal. Jerry Hughes, he was on a 2-year extension, but I'm sure the Bills will find a way to, structure that in case they need to move on from him. But the best days of those two players are behind them. So you need somebody to come in and fill that role. And I thought last season that's the one area that really needs to be improved upon more than any other was the lack of pressure from that front four, the lack of sacks on this defense. There was pressures, in terms of pressure percentage. I think the Bills were like top 3, but in terms of sacks, that Cole front was not quite there. And you look at some of the positional players in terms of edge rushers, Kwity Paye, Jason Owe, Jalen Phillips. Out of those three guys, as well as Azeez Ojulari and Joe Tyron, those guys are that top five. Every top five is pretty good in this draft. It's not great, but pretty good. I could say this is a pretty good top five. It's not a elite top five at this position. Guy that I like is Jalen Phillips, though, out of the U. He's most likely rated the third or fourth best edge rusher. I don't think Payne or Jason Oweh will be available for the Bills to take. Maybe Oweh out of Penn State, that could be a potential, link there if he falls. Jalen Phillips, Joe Tyron is a name that is getting a lot of love, as well as Greg Rousseau. So, those are two guys, Phillips and Rousseau out of the U, that were pretty solid edge rushers. Phillips, a redshirt junior, Rousseau, a redshirt sophomore, I should say. So those are two guys that potentially could happen for the Buffalo Bills. Shout out to Malcolm Kunze out of the University of Buffalo, senior in this draft as well. Maybe the Bills will take a flare on him. I doubt it, but that'd be a pretty cool story. So those are some of the edge rushers that I really like. And in terms of linebacker, that's another position that I really want to talk about on this show today. So there are two really good linebackers in this class. The first one is Micah Parsons out of Linebacker University, Penn State. And the second is a linebacker by the name of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah out of the University of Notre Dame. And I'm a Notre Dame guy. I like Notre Dame. That's my team. Collegiately, that's who I root for. And in terms of how I see Owusu-Koramoah fitting, that is like a true outside linebacker that has a completely rare level of explosiveness. And bringing back Matt Milano was such a huge move for this Buffalo Bills offseason, and bringing back a player that what you get out of him. He fits the scheme. He fits this defense. Pairing a guy like Milano and Tremaine Edmonds with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, I think would be massive for this defense. Now, it's really tough because we're in that territory picking 30th on the board where we just don't know if one of those guys is going to be available at that pick. Just don't know. There's always someone that falls. A.J. Epinesa fell to Buffalo in the 50s. Most draft experts or magazines or whatever thought that Epinesa was a top 35 player in this class. He falls to 52. And, I think that some of these guys are going to fall. It's just a matter of which one. Could this be one that will fall? I just don't know. There are so many strengths to this player. Rare explosiveness, great lateral agility, sideline to sideline, outside linebacker. He's fast, he's physical, and he has a high football IQ, understands the game, the X's and O's, playing in that high level, high impact Notre Dame defense. I like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah a lot. Whether he ends up coming to Buffalo or not, we'll see. Zaven Collins, Jamin Davis, Nick Bolton, Baron Browning, Jabril Cox, all out of high-quality programs, Tulsa, Kentucky, Missouri, Ohio State, LSU. Zaven Collins was really one of the best players on Tulsa this past year. So, you look at those guys that could potentially stand out, and I think that's one of them. So I want to touch on running back as well. I touched on Travis Etienne and Najee Harris. I have a real hard time believing that one of those guys will be available at 30 for the Buffalo Bills. I know Josh Jacobs was a top 25 pick. And he's obviously a high-quality running back in his own right. But day and age of these running backs, these were two elite running backs in college, and we're kind of in that 4-year recycle of running backs where we don't know what team will take one, what team will just pass on one because they don't want to invest a first-round draft choice in running back. But let's just say hypothetically that Travis Etienne and Najee Harris are two running backs that are gone. Who are some other guys out there that could potentially be fits for the Buffalo Bills if Buffalo were to go down that road of taking a running back in the middle rounds again? And it's a plausible thought because you have Singletary, you have Moss, you have Matt Breida, Christian Wade, what will he bring in terms of this upcoming offseason and OTAs and training camp? It's going to be very interesting. But Javonte Williams and Michael Carter, two UNC Tar Heels, both shared the same backfield, both highly productive. Trey Sermon out of The Ohio State. Those are the running backs that I really like besides Etienne and Najee Harris that could potentially last until the Bills' second-round draft choice. And two guys that I think, out of those two, I would take one of the UNC running backs that I would take. Personally, I think Williams is slightly better than Michael Carter, but Michael Carter could be a steal in this running back class. Just throwing that out there. So we covered corners, we covered defensive linemen, we covered linebackers, we covered running backs. Corner, I talked about Asante Samuel Jr. Who would be some other players at corner that could hop out, that could jump out at me, regardless of school or where they played? Sometimes we look into that a little bit too much. But to me, pairing Trey White with an upgrade, with a young corner that played quality snaps, I do think that the guy that jumps out in this class is Patrick Surtain out of Bama. J.C. Horn out of South Carolina, that's another one. Greg Newsome Jr., he's another one. And some names that I really like that could potentially be there in some of the middle rounds. Eric Stoke, Ifitu Melifonwu out of Syracuse, actually, from our own backyard. I touched on Asante Samuel Jr. He's a little bit more of a wiry guy. But those are some of the names that really jump out at me. In terms of Caleb Farley as well, or Farley. I think he's somebody that could end up being a sleeper in this class out of Virginia Tech. They've been able to bring so many quality players to the National Football League from the collegiate ranks, Tremaine Edmonds being one of them. Let's get to a comment here. Jason says, if we can find a way to get Jock, I'd be over the moon. I take it that he is a avid Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan. That would be awesome. I mean, that would be like a really quality draft choice. If we can make that happen, I would really, really love it. Now, drafting offensive linemen is always tough. In any class, it's always tough. Offensive tackle, offensive guard. I look at the Bills' offensive line and I say, to be quite honest with you, it's probably one of their best versions of their offensive line that they've had in a long time. And I still, even with saying that, I still think there is work to be done. Deion Dawkins, Darrell Williams, those were the two tackles, left and right. At center, you got Mitch Morse. When healthy, he's one of the better centers in the game. You bring back John Feliciano. You bring back Darrell Williams as well as a part of that trio of players that were re-signed, along with Matt Milano, of course. And you do have some question marks on this line. It's part of the reason why the run game was so poor, I believe, in watching the games, beyond the season, a little bit here and there, during this quote-unquote off-season. The guards were not up to snuff. Cody Ford, we don't know if he's a guard yet. We don't know if he's a tackle. Only time will tell on that. And Brian Winters was not the guy that, was that true starting guard. I think the Bills have already upgraded at that position with a very under-the-radar signing that they made as recently as last week, bringing in a second-rounder by the name of Forrest Lamp, who was a solid starter for the Los Angeles Chargers, San Diego and Los Angeles the last 4 years. And only, allowed, 2 or 3 sacks in, 1,300 snaps. That's remarkable. That's a really good, underlying stat, I guess you could say. I think he's got an odds-on shot to be a starting guard on this line. But I'm curious to see what John Feliciano brings. Will he be the returning left guard, or will Forrest Lamp give him a run for his money? Regardless, I've always said this. I think competition breeds success, and I think you need to add some competition there at guard, in particular at guard. So who are some guys at the guard position that really jump out at me, that really make sense for the Bills. And once again, I'm going to go back to the well of the Fighting Irish. Aaron Banks out of Notre Dame. Is Aleha Vera Tucker of USC, will he be available? Wyatt Davis out of the Ohio State. Deontay Brown out of Bama. Ben Cleveland out of Georgia could potentially be a mid-rounder. I like Jared Hocker as well at Texas A&M. You have some late-round guys that are some big guys that can contribute in terms of the run blocking as far as being pull guards. Coyote Owasika as well, shout out to him, former UB Bull heading into this draft, and Tommy Kramer as well, a member of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and a guy that I really like in this class of guards this year would be none other than Kendrick Green out of Illinois. I think that he is a decent guard as well that they could potentially target. So those are some names that I'm throwing out there, as far as the guard position. And I think that that's something that maybe we could see as many as 2 guards taken in this draft. It's not the sexiest pick, but let's be honest, this Bills team in and of itself is, for lack of a better term, it's pretty sexy as it is. We really need some guys that can be the grit, add that grit and controlling the line of scrimmage. That's how I think we're going to get through these battles, these wars, shall I say, with teams like Cleveland, Kansas City, Baltimore. Indy is going to be better, I think, this year than they were last year. And I think a large reason for that is actually the upgrade that they just had at quarterback, going from Phillip Rivers to Carson Wentz. Phillip Rivers was 39. He was all pretty much done. Most didn't think he'd come back, and he came back to play for Indy for a year. I think Carson Wentz is going to be heavily improved in this Frank Reich reunion. And within this offense. So, that's something that I definitely want to throw out there. As well, another position that we could look at that people are going to say I'm crazy. People are going to say they have no need for a wide receiver. Okay, to say they have no need for one might be true, but to say that they shouldn't look at the position at all when you have this much talent at this position in this draft is asinine. You always have to leave no stone unturned and try to look at each and every position and see what you could add to your team and make this offense even better than it was last year. That's something that I'm more than willing to look at. So will they be after the Devonta Smith Heisman Trophy winners of the world? Probably not. Will they be after the Jamar Chases? Will they be after the Jalen Waddles? Will they take a receiver in the first round? I highly doubt it. But will they look at a receiver in, the middle rounds? Maybe, a Terrence Marshall Jr. or a Tylan Wallace or a Nico Collins or a Rashad Bateman or a Cade Johnson or an Amari Rodgers. And you look at the colleges that those guys played in and the offenses that they were a part of, they were highly productive players. A guy that I really like out of the University of Purdue is Rondale Moore. He can do a little bit of everything. Great punt returner, great kick returner. He played running back. He played wide receiver. That could be one of the more underrated, quote unquote, Swiss Army knife players in this draft. And let's face it, Buffalo Bills fans and the Buffalo Bills themselves seem to find these guys that can contribute in a wide variety of ways. And I think Rondale Moore could potentially be one of them. So those are some names that I'm looking at as far as potential wide receiver options in this draft. And last and certainly not least, the last position on my, draft strategy priority position list is tight end. And, we added a tight end in free agency in Jacob Hollister. I think the Bills are hoping to strike, lightning in a bottle with Jacob Hollister. You have Hollister, you have Dawson Knox, who 1 week Bills fans love him. 1 week Bills Mafia seems to hate the guy. I don't get that. I think he's only going to get better. He's a young player, and let's put that into perspective a little bit here. He's heading into his 3rd season, and I think he could only get better. It's just going to take a little time, for him to, get to where he needs to be. But I look at the tight end position and I say to myself, why not? Why not take a look at that? It's the same thought process that I have at receiver. Kyle Pitts is one of the best offensive players in this draft, one of the best playmakers that this draft has to offer. He's probably going to go in the top 5. I'd be more than willing to throw that prediction out there. Tommy Tremble, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State. Hunter Long out of Boston College. The guy that I got circled as my tight end to watch in this tight end class is none other than Brevin Jordan out of the U, Miami of Florida. Brevin Jordan is a fast physical specimen at the tight end position. Can run just as fast as a wide receiver. He's got great receiving talent, ability. 6'3", 250 pounds. No doubt about it. I think that he is a guy that should be the apple of Brandon Beane's eye. 3-year starter as well. It's a rarity now that we see some of these prospects, some of these players. They're these guys that really only had one solid season in college. And to me, I want a guy that put starting seasons together, started 2 seasons, 3 seasons. Brevin Jordan started 3 years at the University of Miami of Florida, that is. And I think he's somebody that the Bills could potentially target. Now, this draft is big. This is one that, we need to inch even closer to where we were again. We need to get back to where we were again. We were inching closer to a Super Bowl, but now we got to get back there to see if we can actually go to a Super Bowl this time around. And I think they got the team to be right back into the thick of things. It's just a matter of making those little tweaks here and there to this roster and being just this much better than what they were last year in the AFC Championship game. For as lopsided as that game was, I think it only takes a couple more moves for the Bills to get from point A to point B and competing with the Kansas City Chiefs. So there is my potential Buffalo Bills draft strategies podcast. There'll be more of these, obviously, in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. Subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, as well as YouTube. Thanks so much for tuning in, Bills Mafia. Cannot wait. 15 more days away from the NFL draft. And I got my eyes on that 30th pick. Of course, my 2021 NFL mock draft will be out soon. First round mock. I got a few tricks up my sleeve. I think things are going to get very interesting around that 4th overall selection. Really, our eyes right now, we know pretty much who the first 2 picks of this year's draft are going to be. It's looking like Trevor Lawrence. It's looking like Kyle Wilson. Zach Wilson are going to be the first 2 picks. And that 3rd pick with the San Francisco 49ers, I want to take a deep dive into that pick. I think that I might do that right now, actually. I got the time on my hands. Why not? So stay tuned.